The Creepy Mountain Man. I was 17 at the time, and I had just gotten my first job. I lived in rural Western Virginia, in a small mountain community. My mom's friend owned a camping resort not far from my house that had a general store, and she said she'd pay me to help out in the store during the busy months in the summer. It was a pretty easy job, and I met a lot of out-of-towners, which was nice because our community could get so isolated. Most of us lived pretty far away from each other. One day, a big burly mountain man type came into the store. He was in his late 40s/early 50s, probably 6'5", and about 280 pounds. He looked dirty, like he worked outside a lot. His clothes were sort of tattered and he had a long beard. He bought some basic items, one of which was one of our homemade bars of soap. When he came to the register, he looked me up and down carefully. He didn't talk for a minute, just stared. His people skills clearly needed work. "Did you make this soap?" he asked gruffly. "Possibly," I said. "I help out with that sometimes." "You make a lot of your own stuff? Toiletries and things like that?" "Yeah, I like that," he said, nodding to himself. I honestly did not know how to respond. I quickly rang up his items and he paid with crumpled money. Right before he left, he asked, "You cook, too?" "Sometimes," I replied. "Bet the boys round here are itching to marry you," he said as he smiled to himself. I said nothing. I was puzzled as to what I said that stood out as wife material. I told Krista, Mom's friend/boss, about the bizarre encounter and she laughed it off. So did my family and friends. But then, Mountain Man started turning up more often. We chatted a little bit here and there, and I found out he had a cabin in the woods he claimed he built with his bare hands. He said he hunted and lived off the land, other than the things he bought at the store. Over time our chatter escalated, with him making comments about how nice it would be to have a woman like me around who could make those things, and cook his kills. One time, he even said I had the birth and hips that men lust after. Shudder. He even started inviting me to fish with him, hunt with him, see his place, etc., and I always politely declined. But he got more and more insistent and I told Krista about how uncomfortable he was starting to make me. The intensity with which he said those things really scared me. She said that when he came in, go get her and she would ring him up. Thanks to her, I started speaking to him less, and I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But one night, I was closing up, and it was late, around 10 at night. Krista had left about an hour before, and I was leaving by myself. The only two cars in front of the store were an old blue pickup and mine. I was immediately alarmed because I knew Mountain Man drove a blue pickup. But I didn't see him in the lot, just his car, so I walked quickly to my car and checked the backseat before I started her up. But then when I first turned the key into the ignition, I got nothing but sputters. I tried several more times and got scared quickly. Of all nights, why is this happening tonight? I remember asking myself angrily. Just as I was reaching for my phone to call for help, there was a loud pounding on the driver's side window. I'm shocked that I didn't piss myself. I didn't even want to look, because I knew it was him. But I did, and my suspicions were confirmed. He smiled a big grin at me, showing me exactly which teeth were missing. "Need some help?" he said loudly through the window. I shook my head furiously. "My dad is on his way," I said, hoping to scare him off. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. Mountain Man laughed. "No, he's not," he said. "Open the door." The hairs on my neck stood up straight. How did he know I was bluffing? "No," I said firmly. "Leave me alone." Suddenly he looked angry. He pulled the handle but I had locked all the doors when I first got in. He kept furiously pulling the handle and started pounding on the window. "Leave now or I'm calling the cops." I screamed at him. He clearly wasn't getting the message so I pulled out my phone and called 911. I must have sounded hysterical to the dispatcher, and I knew she could hear him pounding. She said she would have officers out ASAP, but out here, that could be a while. "The cops are on their way. Leave now." I screamed at MM, who didn't seem to let it deter him. But after a few more minutes of pounding, he suddenly stopped and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, hopeful he would leave me alone. But then he started walking back toward me, with a F-King crowbar in hand. "No!" I screamed at him. "Get the FCK away from me." He started swinging at the driver's side window with the crowbar. I ducked down into the passenger seat on the floor and covered the back of my neck like they teach you in tornado drills. I heard the sickening crack of the window but not for long. Suddenly, I heard male voices shouting, telling MM to get away from the car. I sat up and saw two men approaching, one with a shotgun pointed at MM. I recognized them as a couple of guests staying at the resort for a camping trip. I breathed a sigh of relief and got out of the car, telling them that the police were on the way. I thanked them profusely as we waited for the police, and surprisingly MM didn't make any moves to get away, but the cops came pretty quickly after that, so he didn't have much of a chance. They took him away and I gave them my statement. I was pretty shaken up for a while afterwards. A few weeks later I finally got the scoop on the man. Apparently he had a history of mental illness. He had been in and out of state institutions. He really had been living in an old cabin in the woods, where he wasn't taking his meds. They found a journal that MM kept. Apparently, in it he said he was lonely and wanted a wife. He mentioned me by name a lot, stupid name tag, and Luke said there were a lot of lewd things in there about me that he didn't want to share, but tried to put it simply by saying that MM had a detailed plan to abduct me, starting with sabotaging my car engine to get me into a vulnerable position. When Luke said that, I nearly burst into tears thinking about how horribly that night could have gone if those two men hadn't come along. Thankfully, he has been put back into a state institution. With any luck, he'll stay there for good. Mountain Man, let's not meet again.